Michael Bromley.
Thank you very much. Today I'm going to talk about headless commerce. What, why, and how. That is what it is, why you should be interested in it, and how would you get started with it. As you've heard, my name is Michael. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Venture, which is an open source headless commerce framework, which I'll tell you more about a bit later. But first of all, let's clear up just what we're talking about. What? Headless commerce. Well, the commerce part should be clear. Commerce is buying and selling things. Commerce is Amazon or eBay or whatever. I think we all understand what e-commerce is. So I'll concentrate more on the headless aspect. Now, Lizzie did a great job earlier on talking about headless architecture, like with Storyblock. Well, it's the same thing with headless commerce, but repetition is one of the pillars of learning. So I'm going to cover some of this again and then go in a bit more detail. Headless commerce. Who's heard of the term headless commerce, first of all? Okay, a few. Well, it's actually become a buzzword recently in the industry, and do you know how I know this? It's because if you Google the term headless commerce, all of the above the fold results are ads for vendors, and if you scroll down past the ads, all the subsequent results are content marketing blog posts from vendors. This is literally the actual front page of the Google search results. So it's really this term has taken off recently over the last few years. As we'll find out, it's not actually anything particularly new, but the term itself seems new. So although only a handful of you put your hands up as to having heard of headless commerce, once I go into explaining exactly what it is, I think you'll realize that it's quite a familiar kind of architecture. And the thing is, when something becomes a buzzword, then there's all sorts of different incentives become involved. And you go and read these blog posts and try and find out just what it is, and you might end up more confused because you'll find that it's conflated with, a dozen other concepts, and it becomes a little bit murky. So I'm going to clear this all up for you now with a diagram that I've prepared. We're going to build a web app. We're going to build a traditional kind of web app. Who knows what this is? It's a server. It's a server, good. So we need a server. We need somewhere that people are going to connect to when they want to view our website. We're going to need a database, probably. We might even need a couple of databases, high availability. We're going to, of course, need some app logic. And this will be written in some server-side language like PHP or JavaScript or anything else you like, really. And then maybe we've got some caching layer. Maybe we've got some integration with cloud services. Finally, we need to deliver the experience to the end user, and that's done through the browser. So, this is a very traditional architecture, and sometimes it's called monolithic. And to contrast it with headless, some people call it headful, which I highly discourage because it's a stupid word. But we'll settle with we'll call it monolithic or traditional architecture. So, you've probably worked with apps like this. PHP apps usually work this way. You'll have a templating engine, maybe Twig, or with Shopify, they've got liquid templates or handlebars. And on the server, you get the data out of the database, put it into this template, and then respond with a HTML file. Okay, that's pretty simple. So, by the way, if you've not figured out why I laid out this diagram in this particular arrangement, this is a traditional architecture, and the head is the browser, as you can see. And then the question is, how do we transition from this kind of architecture to headless? Well, it's quite simple, as you can imagine. Now, the next slide was deemed inappropriate for a family-friendly and live-streamed event like this. So I had to skip ahead to the... That was unintentional. So this is headless architecture. The head, the browser, is decoupled from the server. It's not attached anymore. Well, actually, it is attached, but it's attached like this. And that attachment is actually a JSON API. And this is typically a REST API or GraphQL. And the server, instead of returning HTML, is returning JSON. And then whatever's going on in the browser has to take that JSON and somehow assemble it into a web page. And typically that's with something like React or Vue or Angular or whatever, some client-side framework that we basically remove the templates from the server to the browser. Shh, don't tell anyone that that's all that's happened. But there are other benefits. There is a reason for doing it this way. So one kind of clear reason, if you just look at the diagram, is that now we can attach other clients to this server pretty easily, like a mobile app. So let's think about e-commerce. You have a web app. Some e-commerce businesses might want a dedicated mobile app. They might even have a point-of-sale system in their shops. Just let me pause a second. Is the breathing sound really loud? I'm going to move it to the side. Can you still hear me? OK, I'm going to have it there. They might have a point-of-sale. I'll try not to breathe. Let's see if I can make it for 45 minutes. Point of sale in the shop. These days, who knows? You might even have an internet-connected fridge. And it can all connect to the same API because this is what the headless architecture brings. As I said, it's not new. We've been writing client-side applications for, I don't know, a decade now. And it's always, this kind of architecture has existed. It's been called maybe API-driven or API-first. Headless, for whatever reason, seems to have become the buzzword that's stuck, whatever you think of that, but that's what I'm going to call it. So some examples. As we heard earlier on from Lizzie, headless is a pretty big thing in CMS. So the CMS industry really kind of took it on board first. And you've got companies like Storyblock and Content Stack, Contentful. These are like SaaS solutions. And then you've got Strappy, which is an open source solution. And this is just a small sampling. There's many CMSs out there. And then a little bit more recently, e-commerce has started to trend towards this headless architecture. And you have, again, a selection of different SaaS providers as well, Commerce Tools. Commerce Tools is probably one of the earliest, or maybe the earliest. And then you've got open source tools, Medusa, Venture, which we'll hear more about. And the whole ecosystem is really expanding pretty rapidly at the moment. What's also left off here is there's kind of existing big e-commerce frameworks like Magento or services like Shopify. They're also trending towards this headless architecture, but they're doing it in the form of bolting on an API and then making things accessible through an API. But the ones listed here are what you could call pure headless. They only expose an API. So that's what headless is. Now let's look into some reasons why you may be interested in it. All right, so the first one we covered, multiple clients. It becomes very natural to connect many clients to one server. And it's not just UI-type clients that you can connect, but it also really facilitates machine-to-machine communication, as in integrations with partners or back office systems or vendors or whatever. It becomes a natural way to work with your platform once you've got a universal and well-designed API to put everything behind. Another aspect is we've now decoupled the UI from the server. And one thing this means is that we're freed from the templating systems imposed on us by the back-end system. So in this example here, you see on this side, you have the old legacy, ugly XML templates of Magento. Whereas on this side, we have the sleek, modern XML templates of React. So there's progress there. No, but seriously, it future-proofs you. There's one term in e-commerce which is a dreaded word, which is replatforming. And this describes the situation where you realize, oh no, our current platform doesn't serve our needs, we need to move on to something different. And this is typically a very big, expensive in terms of time and money kind of proposition, and it's risky. And if you can mitigate that risk or make it less likely that you need to actually move your whole system over, then that is a win. And server tech is typically much more long-lived than front-end tech, with good reason. There's this whole trope about JavaScript fatigue and a new framework being released every few hours, which is good for innovation on the one hand, but you don't want to have to be kind of scrambling around re-architecting the core of your whole business every other year. So there is a natural tendency to want the server side to be long-lived, but you don't want to then pin your whole user experience to the last iteration, which may be at this point 5 or 10 years old. So with Headless, you're free to do what you want on the front end and keep the back end, because it should probably stick around for a while. And we're not just talking the latest new shiny frameworks. It's also tooling and workflows that this implies as well. So, one e-commerce shop that I work on, the code base is 15 years old. Let's not even take 15 years. Let's take 10 years. What was the state of the art 10 years ago? And the second question is, would you like to still be working with that tech now in 2022? Probably not. And that's not to denigrate these tools here, because one day these tools will be these tools, and there'll be another set of tools here. So it doesn't matter about the specific tools, but there is constant evolution and improvement in the way that we work, the opportunities to become productive, to write correct software, and so on. So this is another thing. We're now freed up to use the workflows that fit with our teams, with modern best practices, and so on. And now at a deeper level, beyond just the tooling and the frameworks, let's think about the architecture, how we actually deploy, how we build and deploy. In recent years, as we've moved more towards kind of cloud computing and stuff, there's been some innovations. So one of them is known as Jamstack. Who's heard of Jamstack? Okay. And then an even more recent innovation is edge computing. And I'll talk a little bit more about what these are. So Jamstack, for those of you who don't know, so Jam, J-A-M, stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And it's typically seen as in the form of statically generated websites, generated with something like Gatsby or Hugo or 11T, and running on maybe Netlify or Vercel. And the idea is basically, instead of having a server reach into the database in response to a request, put it in a template and serve it, you do all of that ahead of time during the build step or the deploy step, so that the end result that you actually push to the servers is just a bunch of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. Once you have that, you're then able to put them on a content delivery network all around the world, near to your users. So if someone comes in Australia and wants to visit your website, they're actually just going to get the files right from the server there in Australia, instead of going all the way to Europe. So this is very fast. It's very easy to scale, because to serve a static file is quite resource light, so you can scale as much as you need. It's also secure, because you can't hack a HTML file, at least as far as I know. But there's drawbacks, of course. When you need to make a change to your data, you need to rebuild your site. So imagine you've got an online shop with 1,000 products or 10,000 products, and you want to change the description or the title or the slug for one of them. That implies then you've got to rebuild the whole thing, which is not very nice. It takes a long time, and it can get slow. Now, there have been further innovations to try and mitigate these problems, like I know Next.js and Gatsby and maybe others have systems for kind of rebuilding only the pages that changed. So that comes at the cost of a bit of extra complexity, maybe a bit of extra expense. But that's one approach, Jamstack. For those websites where it makes sense, and I would say probably with smaller ones, you can now do that if you've got a headless approach. You're free to choose that if it makes sense for you. And going a bit further on this line of innovation, there's a more recent trend of edge computing. And this is conceptually quite similar to that Jamstack thing, but now instead of just putting static files at all these servers around the world, what if we could actually ship your app code to execute on those servers all around the world? And this has been used, you might have heard of like Cloudflare workers. You can define small scripts that will take the request and do something dynamic, do some computation on that request, maybe to fetch some internationalization data or optimize some images or something. It can actually be used to serve an entire front-end app dynamically, and I'll show you an example of that later. So to recap why headless commerce might be interesting. So we can easily serve multiple clients. That's a natural extension of the architecture. We can now use whatever modern UI frameworks, approaches, tooling, workflows that we want. And we can avail ourselves of innovations in architectures if they make sense for our projects. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the downsides of headless architecture because, of course, there are always trade-offs involved. So first of all, there's more moving parts. Just for a start, we've got not just a server, we've got a server and we've got some kind of client, at least one client application. For the most part, this is not a big concern in my experience. For the e-commerce case, it can be problematic if you want to, say, have an extension which adds a wish list functionality. Now you have to just implement it also in the front end on a separate app, so there's a bit more work involved in getting that stuff wired up. The main downside is there's more upfront building. You know, if you sign up for Shopify, you know, you fill in the forms and so on, set up your account, and you've got a front end straight away. You didn't have to build anything. You didn't have to do anything. It was all generated by the system itself. With headless, you got JSON. So what you're going to do with the JSON, you're going to build a website to consume it and to turn it into a website for your end users. Someone's got to build that, so that could be a bigger upfront investment. Okay, so we know what, we know why. Now let's see how. How can we get started with headless commerce? First of all, you will need to choose a platform. So again, these examples that I showed you from before. There's SaaS solutions that you can pay for, or maybe they have some free trials. There's also open source tools that you can download and get started with on your local machine right now. And then you'll need some kind of storefront, and there's all sorts of JavaScript frameworks out there, as we know, and we can use any of those to build our storefront. So for this demo, we're going to use Venger. And you know, the one reason I want to use Venger is because it's open source. It's really easy to install. You can, right after this talk or at the break, you can go on your local machine, you can install it and play with it. It's very flexible, and it's just objectively the best. And I'm not biased at all. But to introduce this project a little bit, it's an e-commerce framework. It's built on Node.js with TypeScript, and it's headless, and it uses GraphQL to expose its data via a couple of APIs. And as a bit more background, I've been working on it for about 4 years now. I originally started building it because I was scratching my own itch. My family has, back in the UK, not London, has a company selling art materials, and I've been building their website for like 20 years. And when it came to choosing a new platform, I saw there's an opportunity here, so I decided to have a go at building something again, and this is the result. As I say, it's been about 4 years I've been building it. It's now used by like IBM, spa supermarkets. If you fly Lufthansa or Austrian and you use their Sky Deals online in-flight shopping, then that's powered by Avenger as well. And many other companies, large and small. It's highly extensible because it's written in TypeScript on Node. You have a single tool chain for your entire stack, front and back. And developer experience and productivity is a major focus. So let's build something. I'm going to follow along with the documents you can find at venture.io, getting started, docs, getting started. It looks like this. And now I've got a confession to make. I did no kind of sacrifice to the demo gods this morning either, but I outwitted them because I made a screencast. So you can just pretend I'm doing this right now. I'll stand here. Let's install Venger. So let's start out. I'll do the typing as well. We'll do npx Venger create. We'll get the latest version. We'll call it my shop. Press enter. We're going to choose the database. It supports all the popular relational databases. We'll fill in the connection details. And we'll choose TypeScript, and we'll ask it to populate the server with some test data so that then we can get up and running straight away with a kind of a realistic data set to work with. It takes longer in real life to install the dependencies. I edited that bit out. It's still fast, though. OK, and now it's just initializing the server, populating it with some test data for us. OK, that's finished. So we're going to follow the instructions as it says and change into that directory. And yarn start to start the server. And that looks like we've got a working server. So that wasn't very long. In real life, it maybe take 5 minutes, depending on your connection. And as this is a talk about headless commerce, let's first look at the API. So as I mentioned, this is a GraphQL API. Anyone familiar with GraphQL? Good, OK. So I don't need to explain too much about GraphQL. But as you can see, I'm going to just get a list of products, and I want the ID and the name of the product. And there we go. This is the GraphQL playground. It comes bundled with the server. One of the really nice properties of GraphQL is that it is statically typed, so that we get this IntelliSense. We can see exactly what options are available as we develop. So we've now paginated it and just taken the first 5 results. Let's sort it. Let's sort it by name. OK, we've got it sorted by name here. And just for one more thing, we'll add a filter. Oh, I should still be typing this, shouldn't I? We'll add a filter. And let's filter for all those products with the string plant in the name. And when we execute that, we've got one, hanging plant. And because this is GraphQL, I can say, oh, I actually needed the slug and I needed the description, add that to the query, and get the result that we wanted. So that's the API. So it's a standard GraphQL API. Now let's look at how we would administer the shop, because we can't expect our users just to work with JSON data. So we bundle a administration dashboard, which I'll show to you. We have the typical things that you would expect if you're managing an online shop, to manage product data and so on. We can use facets and collections to organize our products. We have a built-in asset management system with on-the-fly image transforms, so we can specify in a query string what dimensions we want to crop it to. We even have smart cropping where we can set the focal point so we get good crops of our images in our thumbnails. We can of course, see the orders. We've not got any yet. No customers yet, but let's create one. We'll need this later. And I'll create the customer for myself. That's my real email address, but it's not my real phone number. But this is my real password. And I'll just give you a little tour of a few of the remaining sections to show that we can also configure shipping methods, payment methods, taxes, what countries we want to deal with, and so on. E-commerce applications are very varied and have extremely specific requirements, so the best I can do is make it extensible so that you can configure it to the way you want it. And I'm going to show you an example of that configurability in a second. Let's just look at the actual code base that has been generated for us. There's actually only 3 code files. There's an index for starting the server. There is a file for starting up the background worker. And then there's a config file, and that's it. The config file is where all the magic happens, really. So I'm going to give you an example here of, let's say we wanted to add a feature where a customer can upload an avatar, an image. This isn't something that's supported out of the box. In fact, Vendor is very stripped back to just the essentials, and the philosophy is like make it really easy to extend instead of trying to pack everything in that might be needed. So this is how we would customize it to add this functionality so we can upload an avatar for a customer. We add what's called a custom field, and say we want to add a new field of type relation, and it's pointing to the asset entity. Assets is what we call images or binary files. Because it's TypeScript, we get good error messages as we're writing. So that's it, like 5 lines of code. 1 line, really. We're going to restart the server so those changes take effect. So what that implies is by adding that, we're going to update the database. We're going to modify the GraphQL API in several ways so we can query and update an avatar for a customer. We're going to modify the admin UI so we have some way to interact with that. And I'll show you now. If I refresh the admin dashboard and go back to my customer record, now we'll see we have a new widget so we can select the avatar for this customer. And let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to upload a new one. Oh, conveniently, there was just 1 photo of me in that directory, so that's good. OK, and let's update that. And now, just to show how the GraphQL API has been updated, let's head back over to the GraphQL playground. I realize I should have done this in light mode now, but I hope you can see it. Before I can query that data, I'm going to have to log in. So I'm going to log in with the account that I just created. Now, you're going to see my password, OK? Don't cut this out of the live stream. Don't tell anyone, because this is the one I use for all my online accounts. OK, we're logged in. Now that we're logged in, we can query the active user, the active customer. And as we'll see, the GraphQL API now knows about this new custom field we just defined in the config. It knows it's of the type asset, and it knows, therefore, it has a field named preview. So we can get the preview of that image, and that should return as the URL. There we go. So that's just like a little intro into what Vendor is, what it's all about, what it's like to work with. The philosophy really, as I said, is like, because e-commerce apps are so varied, how can we make it as easy as possible to develop the custom functionality that you will inevitably need when you're building something? And systems in the past have tended to be quite hard to customize. And so I really thought long and hard about how can I make this a pleasant, even an enjoyable experience. And we're very lucky now to be in a time when we have tools like GraphQL, like TypeScript, that allow you to do this kind of type-safe stuff with really nice support for the tooling as you're writing your code. So that's the server. I think that was like less than 10 minutes. We've gone from 0 to full headless e-commerce server running locally, like everything that we need. Good. What's next? Now we need a storefront. So as I mentioned earlier, this is like one of the main trade-offs with Headless. We need to build a storefront. And if anyone's built a e-commerce storefront application, it's not easy. There's many, many details that you have to think about. So this is a barrier to entry, and I think it's an area, as Headless as a movement, not just for commerce, but also for CMS and generally becomes more and more prominent. There is a huge space and opportunity for tools to step in that solve this problem of how do we make it really easy to build apps that interface with these headless APIs. Well, we've done our part with Venture. We have a number of integrations for Storefront. We have an integration with the Next.js Commerce project. We have Angular, Remix, and Vue Storefront. Not only that, the community is very active, and there's implementations with Svelte and Gatsby and Astro, so it's like there's some cutting-edge stuff that I've not even touched upon yet. For this demo, I want to use the Remix example. If you've not heard of Remix, this is a pretty new React-based full-stack framework. It's from the team that made React Router. And I was really intrigued by this because I read a blog post that they did where they compared it with Next.js, and they used e-commerce as an example of why Remix is good. And I read that and I thought, wow, it seems really well suited to e-commerce. I'll try it out. I'm not a React developer, so I struggled a little bit, but I managed to make something, which I'll show you. And it is really well suited to e-commerce, so I'm happy to share this one. So a bit more like live code in here. This is the repo where you can find this starter kit. It's got instructions on what you got to do to get it up and running locally, and we'll follow those now. First thing we want to do is copy this, jump over into our terminal, and clone that repo so we've got the code locally. Okay. So now we've got it locally, we'll move into that directory, and we need to install the dependencies, npm install. Now it's time to check Twitter or go for a coffee. I've actually edited this down a little bit so it won't be so long. I've kept it a little bit long just so it's realistic. I know that you all love staring at this progress bar. Okay, it's done. So what's the next instruction? Okay, we've got to make a little alteration to the Venture server because Remix is going to listen on port 3000 by default. So is the Venture server. So there's going to be a conflict. We'll tell the Venture server to instead listen on port 3001. And that's done right here in the config. And we're also going to configure it so that it can use bearer tokens instead of just cookies to manage sessions, because this Remix storefront is using bearer tokens. And that's as simple as that. Now we'll restart the Venture server to make those changes take effect. Just make sure it's now listening on port 3001. Good, it is. Okay, let's go back to the docs and see what the next step is to get our storefront running. Okay, so it says we've got to create a .env file so that we can tell our Remix app where the API is. So this gives us a chance now to open up the Remix app in our editor and take a look at that. And we'll create the .env file and literally just paste in exactly what was given in the README. And let's just check the next step. Okay, step number 4, npm run dev. Good. Here it is. We should be able to get the app up and running now. So the first thing it will do is compile the styles. It's using Tailwind for the styling. And then once Tailwind's done, it's going to start up Remix. And it should tell us that it's listening on port 3000 any second. There we go. Let's take a look at the app. All right, here's our Remix storefront. So this is now, 15 minutes. We've gone from 0 to full stack headless commerce. And this is like fully functional. Caveat, there's a few parts that aren't completed yet. But yeah, the complete like search, add to cart, checkout flow, that's all taken care of. And as you can see, it's pretty fast. It's fast because it's running on localhost, right? But I mentioned before this edge computing thing. So some members of the Venture community managed to get this, starter kit running on Cloudflare pages, which is like on basically running on Cloudflare workers at the edge. And it's so fast. I'm going to show you next, and you can check it out yourself. It's Remix. I think I'm going to open that tab now. Yes, I am. It's remix-storefront.venture.io. So this is like really running on the internet. Watch this. It's so fast. Like, I know this is a term that is bandied around a lot in the JavaScript world, but this is blazing fast, right? Isn't it? It's blazing fast. I use that completely without irony. It is blazing fast. When I saw this demo that these guys have put together, I was sitting there for like 5 minutes, clicking. It's like, how can it be? But it's yeah. What times we live in. So this is the point with like, you can get very into the tech side. You can get very into frameworks and tooling and workflows and ways to deploy and all this kind of stuff, which is cool because we're technologists and we love this kind of stuff. But when it translates into an experience like this, then it makes sense. That's the whole purpose, is to facilitate people doing what they want to do, which is buy some RAM. So this, I mean, it's one of those situations. Have you heard about this like UX phenomenon where something's so fast you have to add a fake spinner, otherwise people don't believe that anything actually happened? I think we might have to add one of these on this project. Anyway, so that's it. 0 to full stack headless commerce, 15 minutes. There you go. So in summary, we've learned. What have we learned? We've learned what headless commerce is. It's just API. It's just an API. I'm not a content marketer. It's just an API. Decouple front-end APIs. Why? It gives you the freedom to choose the technology stack, the workflows, the architectures that make sense for your project. You're not held back by a decision that was made 10 years ago on what platform you want to use. And how can you get started with it? Use Venture. Thank you.
This talk was everything I hoped it would be and more. Thank you so much. Give it up for Michael, everybody.
Thank you.
Good. So good. It's amazing, like the way you broke down headless with the robot and then explained the serverless and edge computing, like the whole thing. It was an amazing talk. I want to invite questions. We have time for 2 questions. If you have a question, show me your hand. If you don't have a question, don't show me your hand. I see no questions, so I'm going to ask one, and then maybe 2, and then if you think of one, feel free. My question to you is how pluggable. This is with no no agenda or anything, but how pluggable is that database piece? You chose connecting to Postgres and MariaDB and all these. So it's an open source project. So what's it going to take to add one?
So the data layer is handled by type ORM.
Okay.
So whatever type ORM can connect to, which is not yet Zata. Not yet. But whatever it can, so if you want to use like CockroachDB or Amazon Aurora, whatever, then yeah, that's nice. Supported.
And how is the search powered? What are you using?
So by default, we ship a kind of simple search, which is just using the full text search capabilities of your database. But there is also an Elasticsearch-based plugin, and I'm also developing a plugin based on TypeSense, which, if you don't know TypeSense, check it out. It's like one of the best open source projects out there. Crazy performance and an amazing team.
Also blazing fast?
That's an also genuine stamp, seal of approval. It's blazing fast. It's so fast.
Yeah.
It's really good. And it's like proper open source, and there's like 2 guys building it, and it's amazing. I've got no agenda on that. I just love the product.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Questions? No? Okay, cool. Well, in that case, thank you once again, Michael.
Thank you.
So good.